Hi everyone, I'm Alanah and welcome to my channel, where today we are talking about Cyberpunk previews. Now, honestly, I would have made this video months ago, but I hoped somebody else would, but it kind of seems like that isn't happening. So here I am. I basically think there is a pretty significant disservice that I realize has been going on in the way that this kind of thing has been covered, both from games media and from the way that I've seen a lot of YouTubers talk about it as well. And I think these people are setting their audiences up to fail, and I think that I did that as well. And this will happen again. Now, the reason I say I didn't want to make this video is because I don't feel like I'm the right person to make this video because, as I have said literally every time I have ever spoken about Cyberpunk, this. But first, a disclosure. I'm just going to make it every time I ever talk about this game. Just owning the fact that I'm very biased where this is concerned. I am super biased where this game is concerned, and I'm just owning that off the jump. I am in the game, so extremely biased where it's concerned. Don't buy it because I like it. I voice a very minor NPC in the game and tried to avoid talking about it post-release as a result because I just don't feel like anyone should want to come to a person whose name is in the credits for any kind of critical coverage. It seems obvious to me, but I realized upon editing that I should add a note here. I was always cool with just disclosing my bias and talking about it before release because access to the information was restricted. When there's no other way for you to get access to the game, me choosing to limit the sharing of information rather than just disclosing my involvement would be overall negative to players, in my opinion. Now that it's out and there are loads of people talking about it, I don't see a ton of value in me speaking about it when every other person has the same access to the information that I do, and I don't have anything to say that other people haven't already said other than this video. Which, side note, if me making that disclosure makes you want to click out of this video, please do. I would just hope that you also would have clicked out of every video where I made the disclosure 6 months ago. I think they are very important and I think we should take them seriously. But I digress. Basically, people who listened to the extremely positive, consistently positive, I mean, everyone was really saying the same stuff, previews of Cyberpunk 2077 feel like they were lied to. The very short summary of this video is that people who played Cyberpunk 2077 early and spoke about it did not lie about anything. There were no lies told. For the most part, and certainly in my experience, a lot of these people were just very excited, like just as excited as the general public seemed to be. Everyone gets caught up in the same hype. And were shown a very specific tailored preview build. I can't speak to the reviews. I did not get an early review copy of the game. I did have 2 people come on my channel to talk about that, but I did not have any input on that as I didn't get a review copy. So I definitely can't speak to the review scores. But what I played was essentially the exact same as the gameplay videos that were released in 2018 and 2019. Like very, 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 very similar. It was actually just those 2 chunks of gameplay sort of stitched together. If you saw how excited the internet was about these gameplay videos when they came out, imagine how excited I was to be playing it and everyone else who covered it. That's pretty much what they played. It was mind-blowingly awesome, and there are still parts of Cyberpunk that I think are very good. Just to be clear, I do generally like the game overall as someone who is playing it on PC with a 3080, despite recognizing there is room for improvement. But we did also stream it directly from PCs in Poland rather than downloading the game ourselves. It was all very controlled, and the main point is that that is not unusual. I did have 4 different people come on this channel to talk about the preview to make sure that it wasn't just my coverage and there were a lot of different angles. And while I did play it in a very linear way, I essentially just played those 2 bits and didn't really explore the open world a tremendous amount. We did have people on that stream talk about the more open world sides of the game. But, you know, all of the preview impressions are very similar. They're all very positive, and they all say very similar stuff. They all like the game. It's actually just because what we played all lines up. We all played the same thing. You know, what I played did have pieces missing, the crafting was missing, there were cutscenes missing, plenty of things that we couldn't do and loads of things that we couldn't speak to. And now I sort of think that myself and everyone else who has ever done a preview and has not been more explicit about quite how they function has made a mistake. On the same note, every YouTuber who is telling you that anyone who liked the game was paid or was reading a script is also doing you a disservice, because that is absolutely not the truth. And I figured I could explain this myself, but I figured it would be more useful to speak to someone who has made preview builds or worked on them or shipped them and, you know, has kind of become a bit of a spokesperson for developers in general in some cases. So, cue interview I did with Dutch indie game dev Frommy. Can you tell me, like, what exactly is a preview build? Or when you give a preview to press, what are they actually playing?
Right. Usually what happens is early on in development, you create this thing called a vertical slice. Right. And the idea of that is that you take a small fraction of the game and you kind of get it to the level where you want it to be at the end. And it's aspirational, right? It's not real. It's more of a thing you use to promote what you're trying to do, to get the team to understand what you're trying to do. It's sort of a communication tool more than anything else. And a preview build is usually more of a reflection of that. It's separately built. It's usually on a completely separate track from the main development of the game. And it uses a lot of the systems you're going to use. And obviously a lot of the render tech you're going to use. But it might be that you're using too many resources for the final game, or a mechanic doesn't work out, or an entire sequence gets cut, or a level gets cut. Like it's the idea of where you want to go.
So one point of confusion that I see about this is, would you say that a preview build of a game is the game, or is it kind of a separate thing entirely?
Yeah, I think it's more of a separate, like it depends, obviously. It depends on the game. It depends on the scope of the game. It depends on how far in development the game is, and what kind of things happen in development. But I think generally it's sort of a separate thing entirely. Even on indie games that I've worked on, very frequently the preview build is something where you put some of the best parts of the game that you have together, and sometimes even create a few things that are going to be in there later, hopefully. And sometimes you cheat a little bit. You cut some corners to make a thing work right there, because you know you're going to build it later. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I guess that's game development as a whole is effectively cheating, right? We're lying, like the building isn't real. It's floating in a blue box of infinity, and we just put a sky image on it.
And that's basically the gist of it. A preview or a demo is extremely subject to change, and the bigger the game gets, the more likely it is to break, especially with an open world game. Even if it's something really small, say there's a book at the beginning of the game, something that you add later that has nothing to do with that book could break that book, could make it function in a different way, because code is very fickle. I almost feel a little bit condescending being that specific about it, because I know it's common knowledge to a lot of people who follow games, but I felt like it's something that I should highlight because of some of the conversations that I've had, that it is clear that not everyone necessarily knows this thing that maybe I take for granted that everyone knows, where people have said, but how could it possibly be buggier 6 months later than it was when you played it? Basically, the more of the game exists, the more bugs there are. And again, the builds are also separate, but to give you more information, I asked Rami about this too. So how is it possible, and this has, when I was a journalist, 3 years ago now, this did happen a number of times, that a preview build can have no bugs, but then the final release of a game, even in the same section that was seen in the preview build, can have a bunch of bugs. How does that happen?
Well, that mostly happens because a preview build like that is its own independent little part of the game, right? So they can really sort of lock in on just how things work in that tiny section of game. So you make sure that things work well. Usually they're pretty controlled in how and what you can do. You know what abilities the player has at the start of the preview. You know what they can do, where they're going to go. You know how much time they have. You know where it's going to end. So it's a lot easier to get that perfectly right than, say, in an open world game where there's 60 different ways to enter a room.
Basically, more video game, more choice, more bugs. That is one of a million reasons that previews are often across the board so positive. But I do also think there is a culture of people being more forgiving with them because they know they are works in progress, and that it is an early build. In the case of Cyberpunk, what I played was awesome. It really was. It's also that a lot of the things that I was told bled into that. What the dev team was saying was awesome, and some of that stuff did not make it into the final game. But yes, to this point, a preview build is an early build. It is massively subject to change, and it is not the game. For a review copy, yes, it is effectively the game, sans occasionally a day one patch, which people are generally very explicit about, but a preview build is not the game. That is not true. It is misleading, and a lot of people clearly don't understand that, and that is a coverage mistake. I did also see it make headlines when it came out that the demos were faked, and found it very odd to see that making so much news when every demo is faked. Every single one is fake. All of them. 100% of them are fake. That is a weird, reductive way of phrasing it, but that isn't a new thing by any means. Literally all of them are fake. Different builds are not the game. All of them. So now here's the part of the video that I feel like people will dislike most, even though I'm sure, going against the popular narrative will upset people regardless here, still feels worthwhile to make this video. While it does seem like Cyberpunk had more discrepancies to the general public from what the game said it was earlier, or what previewers said versus what it was when it came out, I don't believe that any of that was intentional. And when I say that, I'm speaking on a dev level. Not on a level of upper management or higher ups. I am speaking on the level of the developers, who are the people that I spoke to, who led my demo, who I interviewed. I imagine that the demo that I played and that everyone else played was exactly what the game was intended to be and planned to be when it released. I imagine everything those devs said, which is what all of the media and YouTubers reported on, and all the subreddits covered and all that stuff, was intended to be in the game and was consistent with their vision, which I think is the same for No Man's Sky in most cases. The multiplayer thing throws me for a bit of a loop there. Some of that coverage was very off. But they believe what they said to be true at the time, just as the people who previewed it did. The game just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it got away from them. And I've been saying this since before the game came out, just because the repeated delays and something about the way they were doing it really concerned me. Not because of what I played. Again, what I played was rad, but I really wish they had delayed the game further. I wanted that even before December, you know? It just felt like it shouldn't come out. And as a side note, God, it sucks to watch people get mad whenever devs delay games. Be pro game delay. It will give you better video games, even if it sucks. We want games to come out later if they need more time. And I know that some of the rhetoric surrounding that is like, well, but they should know better. They shouldn't promise a release date if they can't. And I do have a video that I just put up recently on this channel where I talk about why sometimes they have to do that. I'll leave a link in the description that's very specifically about why that happens, and certainly why it happened with CD Projekt Red. But where it comes to announcing a release date when they know, the truth is, like, video games are really hard to schedule time for. Very, very, very hard. You can say, might be done in 6 months, and it could be 2 years. Because they're so complicated to make, which is what's so cool about our medium, but also screws people over where this kind of conversation is concerned. Now, I do think some things are probably going to change out of everything that happened here, especially like specifically with CD Projekt Red, and I think some of these things are good and some of them are bad. I think one of the things that is a pro and a negative is that they probably won't talk about their game in progress so openly again. I mean, the same thing burned them with The Witcher 3. The way the game looked before it came out and then afterwards, people were very, very critical. It's just that things changed over the development cycle. And I think being one of the most open game studios that I've ever encountered, which as someone who really likes talking to developers and learning about their processes, especially again, now that I work at a dev studio, I'm like so interested in what other people are making. I think that that's something that they will probably learn to cut off. This is a positive for consumers because it means that they won't say things that don't end up in the game, which can be taken as marketing. Even if it's just kind of devs chatting about what they're making, you're still saying that publicly where an audience can hear it. There's a negative for consumers there, like 1000% over. From my perspective, having a dev studio of that scale that was so unrestrained, like second to none unrestrained, everyone else is so much more locked down by their PR departments, was great. But I think we will probably lose that. They will probably be a lot more controlled by PR across the board, and ultimately that is going to help a lot of people. And of course, I really hope, again, a thing that I would have done differently, is that on the press side, which for me I would include both traditional journalists and YouTubers, people will be a lot more transparent about what preview builds actually are. There's usually a note on a lot of the big sites saying like, no, this is subject to change, it's a preview build, but it is nowhere near explicit enough. That has not been communicated anywhere near to the extent that it should have been. And truthfully, I don't think there's actually any way that press really can know if a demo is going to turn out different to the final game. I actually don't think anyone who played Cyberpunk early and reported on it could have known that anything would change from what they were told. And I don't see that changing. I just don't know how it could change. Maybe someone in the industry can figure that out, but I don't really see an obvious solution there, other than to be much more explicit when saying, temper your expectations. This preview could be inaccurate. Things could change very significantly. I think it especially occurs for games that have been in development for a really long time. I guess audiences also really have to listen for that to work. That's a part of it. I really don't feel like anyone listened when I said I was biased about the game, because people seem to have just forgotten every time that I said that now. I'm like, I wish people had heard. I was saying that for a really good reason. I knew I was really excited about this game, and that I am still a fan of it. That hasn't changed, despite recognizing some of the stuff is really anti-consumer, which brings me to one sort of final point. I've always been very pro-review, And I hope that audiences are a little bit more pro-review about this now too. I wrote a thing for IGN way back about how I thought it was really anti-consumer that Bethesda wasn't giving reviewers more than 1 day with any of their games. So they basically couldn't accurately tell their audiences if there were bugs, if there were features missing that were reported on. I think it's a bad policy for the public to not give some people early access to a game. And there are a lot of really hostile comments in response to that, ultimately. A lot of shut up, I don't need reviewers, I make my own decisions, you don't deserve early access to anything, cry harder, IGN. And there has also been a recent consistent rhetoric that is along the lines of even accepting games early makes you a shill. But from my perspective, if people had had early access to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One copies of the game, which I would hope that the public would try to put pressure on the publisher for, then people would have known that there were massive issues with those particular versions of the game. They can warn people that the product they're about to buy is really broken. I think IGN gave the console versions a 4. I definitely tweeted that out. Felt like a thing that people should know. And restricting early access to those things, from my perspective, is a really awful practice. I immediately assume it's shady if a publisher isn't giving people early access to a game. I immediately think that there is something wrong, and I hope that general gamers are more open to that line of thinking going forward. I do also want to note that I did from the start, literally the first video where I spoke about this, wasn't quite as explicit there, but I said it in IGN videos as well, say that there was no way that this game was going to run on Xbox One and PS4. Inexcusable. I've also repeatedly said that I think it's 100% CDPR's fault and that is inexcusable and super anti-consumer and I'm not in support of it at all. But I definitely did explicitly say that on more than one account. There's no way it was ever going to run. In closing, to surmise, a preview build is a plan for what a game is supposed to be. It isn't always possible, and that's usually because of higher-ups, because of management, because of the people trying to make the money, because of the stock market, rather than because of the dev team. Is everyone who plays a game early and says positive things paid off or lying to you? No, obviously not. I mean, in the paid off part, that would be a massive lawsuit. That would be a huge lawsuit that would currently be under investigation if that were a thing, because it is extremely illegal to pay someone to give a positive opinion. Alrighty, that is it for me today, everyone. I'm Alanah. I will see you guys next time.